Our last first Wednesday of the year. Going forward, here's kind of how we've decided to do this. We're going to do these first Wednesday forums February through May, and then we'll break for the summer. And then in the fall, we're going to have kind of evening classes. So we'll address topics kind of every Wednesday, maybe on finances, maybe on counseling, maybe on I don't know, marriage or parenting or something like that. So that's going to be the format. We'll have February through May, these first Wednesdays, and then break for the summer, and then in the fall we'll kind of have Wednesday classes that'll go for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever the class might entail. This evening, though, I'm very excited to have Ben Bost with us. He is one of the co-founders of Love and Transformation, which is a organization that talks about culture and how to create healthy culture in organizations, how to observe culture, these kinds of things. And he's got quite an interesting background with being part of. He was a chaplain for the PGA Tour, right? And so he's got experience working with professional athletes and trying to bridge that gap between the Bible and just kind of what's going on in culture, sports culture, these kinds of things. And he is married to Carrie, his wife right there, and they have 3 kids. And so he's attended our church here for a few months, and we're just excited to have him. So please welcome him up, and we'll look forward to hearing him tonight.
Thank you, Jason. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight and to have a chance to share with you all about this. It's going to be a bit of an adventure, and here's the reason why. I'm running off my laptop right here, and it's got like 60% juice, and I got no charger. So it might go dead in the middle of it, and we'll just have to deal with it, right? It's kind of how those things go. I guess it's a lesson, and you should come prepared, right? Which I think I did for the most part. Anyway. So tonight I get a chance to share with you about communicating with culture. And this initial slide, if you couldn't see the background image, this is the image that's in the background of pretty much my entire slide deck tonight that you will be looking at. And I found this image and I really resonated with it because I think this in some ways is a paradox for us. People have tried this. In trying to communicate the gospel, the greatest things that we have that are about meaning, life, and faith. And people have tried this. They've stood on street corners and they've used bullhorns and they've tried to tell everybody what they should believe and where they're going if they don't believe the correct or certain things, right? And we all know how this goes over. Doesn't go over very well. Interesting thing, if you look at the people in the background here, all of their backs are pretty much facing away from the guy with the bullhorn, and they're blurred out. The other side of the paradox is this: knowing what we know as followers of Jesus and what it has provided for our life. Don't you at times really have a hunger to, in some ways, do this, to get the message out, to get it to people? Right? This would be great if we could just stand somewhere and proclaim the reality of what it is, and yet in our current day and context and culture, it might come off even the same way. Will people actually listen to you? Do they want to hear the message? So in many ways, we have to be able to understand and read our culture today, and that's a lot of what this is going to be about tonight. And so you might be asking, okay, Ben, like what kind of credibility do you have to be able to stand here tonight and communicate this to us? And Jason referenced a little bit of my background, but the weirdest part about it, as far back as I can remember, like all the way back to high school, I have been processing life with people in relationship. Like I was that dude in high school who, like people would sit down and process their weird high school relationships with me. Like it was like on my forehead, it was written, talk to me about your relationships. And so they would, and that's kind of when it started. And I began engaging in conversation with people, and it just carried on through my life. Well, there was a period of time where I actually was a professional athlete. I played professional golf for 7 years. And you can verify this with my wife, that as I was walking fairways with other players, you get in conversation. You know anything about golf? You got 4 hours with people? That's a long time. You can talk about everything under the sun with that person. You get to know their kids, their family background, their entire life story, if they actually talk to you. But the way it goes for most guys on the golf course is this. Whoosh. Shot, Thanks. And then you walk. Not a whole lot of interaction. But if you played with me, it was a little different. And my wife made these observations, like, how in the world do you do this? Like, I overhear some of these conversations, and next thing you're talking to these guys about life. And I said, I know, right? I have no idea how that happens. It's kind of followed me everywhere. So then when my life converted into doing chaplaincy in professional sports for Major League Baseball and the PGA Tour, I was in this international environment of dealing with people who spoke different languages. They didn't come from the same background I came from. So all along, I've been having these conversations. And then throw on top of that business leaders in the professional sense and helping them navigate personal and professional issues. What started to happen for me is there was a series of questions that began to order themselves as I had these conversations with people. And they became known to me as these just 5 essential questions of life and meaning. I have a friend with another organization who actually named them the 5 questions everyone must answer. And so I don't take any credit for that. We actually do experiences inside the Institute around the 5 questions everyone must answer, but I don't take credit for the name. He named it, I go, that's great, I'm taking it. You good with that? He's like, yep. And so tonight we're actually gonna deal with the first of the 5 questions, which is this: what is the goal of life? Now, this is a question I've been literally asking for over a decade to people. I mean, I've targeted servers, people, like I've just been asking this everywhere I can. And what's really interesting about this question, what is the goal of life? I get the same answer arranged in a very specific way about 100% of the time. And so I want you to take your kind of Christian filter off for a second, and I want you to answer this question for me. When you look out into culture today, media, marketing, advertising, friends, family, coworkers, our world, how do you think people answer this question? Anyone? Get what you can. Happiness? What were you going to say? Be happy? Be successful? Anything else? What do you guys think? How would your generation answer this question? Huh? Money? Please yourself. All right, so 100% of the time, a lot of times in settings, it would go to be happy, first thing. Or they will tell me everything that will make them happy. They'll give me a list. Make money, have fun, be famous, be known, be successful, find meaning, a lot of the things that were said here. But the reality is, this question right here, for over a decade, and so goofy guys like me, what do you do when you get information like that? You begin studying happiness. And that's what I started to do. Because as I was engaging with people, I go, I think I need to be prepared to answer this question. As a follower of Jesus, with the greatest message in the world, if this is what people are looking for, how do I address it? Am I prepared? Can I have a conversation about it? And so here's the thing with this. The reality is the words really don't matter. It's the concept. People will say, I want to be deeply fulfilled or satisfied. They have these longings they're trying to fill. But tonight, for the sake of the conversation, and I think once we get through this, you'll understand why I've focused on the word happiness. Because I think this is the question of our culture that they're trying to answer. And I think it's the question we're all trying to answer. And it is a valid question to have. Now, when I've asked believers a lot of times this question, followers of Jesus, what is the goal of life? And I don't give them any of that setup of like friends, family, coworkers, media, advertising, all that stuff. What do you think they normally come back with? The Christian answer to this question, what is the goal of life? Anything? Glorify God. Almost 100% of the time. And I'm like, yes, of course, yes, that's it, right? But if you take that out to the world and you ask someone that question and you come back with, what is the goal of life? And you say, well, it's to glorify God. In our world today, that'll go over about as well as Buddy Jesus from Dogma. Hey, you need a buddy? Because in many ways, this is how our culture thinks about Jesus. If they think about him at all, it's a caricature, it's a myth, it's phony, it's not anything that's real or for us to deal with. And so the way we're going to do this tonight is we're going to start with culture, because here's what I would tell you. People are longing and hungering for happiness. And the reality is, our culture is very confused about happiness. And so we're going to illustrate this. We'll start with marketing and advertising. I don't know if you can see that up there on the screen, but like right here, happiness is a recipe away. Any of you guys like Nutella? Yeah? They also have another one of their marketing ads was spread the happy. And so when I've done this presentation in college settings, the students love this slide because they're like, yes, I go to Costco, I buy the big vat, and I sit there at 2 a.m. and eat spoonfuls of it in my dorm. That's like the reality. It's really good. Come on. Okay, so if you don't like that, how about Dutch Bros? Anybody a fan of Dutch Bros? You got to have a little Dutch Bros every once in a while, right? Anybody here work for Dutch Bros? No. Good, I'm safe. Okay, so look, right here, this is their creed. This is what they teach their employees, to be so strong that nothing can disturb your peace of mind, to talk health, happiness, and prosperity to every person you meet. Dutch Brothers, great company, solid leadership culture. And you know what? It can be a little awkward when you roll up to get your coffee and someone leans out the window and goes, hey, what are you up to today? I'm like, dude, I just want my coffee. Like, it's a little awkward today. Not in for it, you know. But Dutch Bros, what else do we have here? Oh, if you do a lot of video conferencing and you're not using Zoom, you're not meeting happy. And I'm the weird guy that rolls through airports and takes pictures of this kind of stuff. What else do we got? San Diego. Now, San Diego, we got to admit, does make people happy, okay? Weather's great, beautiful place, right? All that stuff. And it's, you know, when we lived in Phoenix, it was just right around the corner. I think there's a direct nonstop on Southwest to San Diego from here. But anyway, if you're looking for happiness, get on a plane, go to San Diego. And we cannot leave off Disneyland. Okay, so I took this picture when we were at Disneyland the last time. Buzz Lightyear, Star Command. I have found even more happiness. Well, what you can't see is under the Disneyland logo at the bottom, there's a little saying as it says, Disneyland keeps getting happier. The happiest place on earth, right? I was talking to a friend about this once, and he goes, dude, Disneyland is not a happy place. He goes, have you seen how many kids are just crying in strollers and the parents are miserable looking? Right? Because they spent all their money to get everybody in there. Disneyland, happiest place on earth. I think it's Boise, Idaho, personally. Anyway, for some people, this is a reality right here. Pornography, hitting the pleasure button, Playboy makes them happy, anything. Oh no, did it just die? No. Oh, I bumped it. Let's see here. Come on. It's thinking. Anyway, what do we got? Wow, very interesting. Okay, so anyway, where were we? Playboy makes people happy. Some people, that's the case. We're having technical difficulties. And this does not make me happy. But it is really funny. It's okay. We'll get there. Should I start over? No. All right, so my next slide after that was, let's see here. Oh, yeah. The next slide was a slide from Apple, and you'll see this in a second. So in their keynote a few years ago, they go through all this stuff when they're releasing all their new products. And there was a small little insert there, and the question that they ask as they are developing their products is, how does it make you feel? As Apple's building their products, their whole goal is to answer that question. How is it going to make people feel? And then the slides that came after that was slides from Coca-Cola. There was 2 pages on Coca-Cola's website for a really, really long time. One was, what is happiness? Okay, anybody know what the former slogan of Coca-Cola was for a really, really long time? The real thing, that's an old one. You guys are like dating yourself, but that's okay. It is an old one, but what was that? Have a Coke and a smile. That's even older, I think. That's like way back there. But then there's open happiness, for about the last 15 years was their slogan, their main primary slogan. Should we try and reset mine up here? No? That was my fault. I bumped it. So you had open happiness was their slogan for a really, really long time. But here's the interesting thing, and when we get there, I'll show you these pages. Their new webpage, if you actually go to Coke's website and look at it, what you'll see is they've changed their slogan. And their slogan now is taste the feeling. And they talk about having new rewards and new experiences and all these different things that are going on. And that's because they are clued in. Who do you think has the best psychology data on being able to create marketing and advertising in our society? Coca-Cola and all those other companies, right? So they know exactly what's going on in the hearts of people and the minds of people. And the reality is this: a lot has changed in our culture. And today, what we would say is that a majority of people are leading with emotion and experience. Coke knows this. And so what they've done is they've adjusted their marketing campaigns to match. They are marketing to people in emotion and experience. And that's really what's happening and what's going on. Hey, let me try to relaunch this right here and see if that doesn't help real quick. No? Well, this is very unfortunate. Give me 1 second here. Come on now. That's what we did. And they got a presentation over there too we may have to go to. So what do you suggest, guys? 1 minute? Oh, you got it. Hey, there we go. All right, so use this. Okay, yeah, we'll just transition. All right, so great. All right, so there's what I was talking about. Can you believe this? Can you believe that there was 10 steps on how to be happy on Coke's website for a really long time? Would you ever go to Coke's website to understand what happiness is? I know, right? So here's the one I was talking about. Look, the refreshing taste of Coca-Cola beverages paired with new and rewarding experiences. Taste the feeling. All right, here we go. Who liked this song? I couldn't leave this out. Happy, right? This was released in November of 2013. #1 song in the UK, US, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, and 19 other countries. 2014 best-selling song. Pharrell Williams, Happy. Whoops. And so have you ever looked at the lyrics of this song? You guys want to sing this with me? Seriously, ready? Come on. You guys love this stuff. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. What? Okay. Keep going. Because I'm happy, clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Well, keep going. Because I'm happy, clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. This is the mantra of our culture. Do you see that in there, in the lyrics? Happiness is the truth. What happiness is to you, self-defined happiness, well, hey, go do it. Here's the only problem with this. It doesn't work logically. What if your happiness and my happiness are different and they collide? Or what if my happiness tells me I want all your stuff? And so you got to let me go to your house and take all your stuff. And you can't tell me no, because what makes me happy makes me happy. What makes you happy makes you happy. This is the world we live in. All right, so on Sunday I threw these characters up. These are 4 cultural influencers and voices. And some of you may know, I know there's some people in here who know who some of these people are. But I wanted you to, as kind of a teaser, they have strong influence today in our society right now. And from left to right, here's who they are. Dr. Martin Seligman, Dr. Brene Brown, Dr. Jordan Peterson, and Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And that's a Hungarian name. I did pretty good pronouncing it. You might have a better effort, but these are the 4 individuals. And I'm just going to give you brief descriptions a little bit because I'm setting the stage here. If I haven't already showed you that in media, marketing, advertising, and just music and film, I didn't really put film up there, but at least music, happiness is a big deal to people. And it is being targeted. All right, so Martin Seligman became the chair of the American Psychological Association in 1998. When he got in there, he looked around at the place and he goes, we've been studying depression for 25 years and we're getting nowhere. He goes, why don't we start studying happiness? And that's exactly what he did. And he's launched an entire program at the University of Pennsylvania called Positive Psychology. And out of that has come the study of happiness as a science. And in many ways, what they're trying to do is just disprove happiness, or prove that happiness is nothing more than a chemical reaction in your brain. We don't need God. All we need is, to show people how to be better, happier, to have more juice flowing around in their brain, and great. Now, some of you have probably read Brene Brown or some of her books. Has anybody interacted with any of her books? A couple, right? Listen to her TED Talk or whatever. She's been on Oprah, like that's what you do when you're popular. You go on Oprah. And she focuses on shame and vulnerability, like these 2 things that are connected. Shame being this thing inside of us that something's desperately wrong with us and can't be righted. And the only way that really gets fixed is through vulnerability, being able to bring the good and bad parts of us into relationship with others. So she's been an expert, top of the top of people seeking to try to understand what she has to share. Now, Jordan Peterson's an interesting one. He's a psychology professor from Toronto. And his book's been on tons of bestseller lists, but it hasn't made it on the New York Times bestseller list because I think they're boycotting him because he really talks about morality and ethics. A lot of young men are finding a bunch of information here that's helping them to live more substantial, meaningful lives. I've listened to him. He's fantastic to listen to. He talks a lot, uses a lot of words. That's what professors do. And then Mihai wrote a book called Flow in the Zone. It's basically about how to find what you love and how to get in the zone. And in professional sports, that was a big deal. You want to get in the zone, and everything's good there. Someone said to me recently, they're actually trying to create a pill to put people in the zone. I don't know who that was, but anyway. Let me ask you a question. These are strong cultural voices in our world today. Are any of these issues the church should be involved in discussing? Where are we in this conversation as followers of Jesus? Because here's the thing. When I talk to believers who've read or interacted with these people, you know what they say to me? They go like this. They go, I think they're a Christian. Everything they're talking about in their books and stuff is it's like what we want. And I'm like, I don't think so. There's really no indication that any one of these individuals at any high level is coming from that perspective. But they are having a huge impact on our culture. So here's the thing. Why is happiness so important? I just illustrated for you briefly with some technical difficulties and all kinds of fun stuff. The reality of this is a big conversation in our world. Why is this so important? How are these numbers interconnected and related? So there was a recent CDC report that came out, Center for Disease Control, that from 2006 to 2016, there was a 70% rise among youth in suicide over the previous 10 years. 70%. It's the second leading cause of death amongst youth today is suicide. And we're also at a 30-year high across all age groups for suicide in our culture. And so the reality of this, and I'm very, very sensitive to this issue, and I'll go into that a little bit more later, but I'm guessing if we just sat here and talked for a little bit, we've either encountered it in some way, family members, friends, things that are going on, school mates. Who knows what's going on? But this is the reality. This is the report that was just released. Do you guys know who these folks are? Any of them? Do any of you know who any of those folks are? What's that? Yeah. So from left to right, these are four young men who recently, in the last 8 months, took their lives. On the left is Tim Bergling, known as Avicii. All right, so all you adults here, anybody know who Avicii was? Do you guys know who Avicii was? Yeah. So this guy, Avicii, was the king, pretty much, of electronic dance music and the rise of that. He's a DJ, worldwide, colossal DJ. Like, when he would go and spin music, hundreds of thousands of people would show up. And there's a whole underground dance movement culture, music culture out there. It's not as much underground anymore because, like, Calvin Harris, which is another name, it's like one of the wealthiest celebrities in the world, but you may not know who Calvin Harris is. They probably know who Calvin Harris is, right? And this type of music is emotional and it's experiential and there's lights and, it's a lot of the kind of music that people would see at raves. And I have a friend who came to follow Jesus out of the rave culture, and he said there's an inner code in the rave culture, and it's the word plur, P-L-U-R. And it stands for peace, love, unity, and respect. Sounds like the church, doesn't it? Or at least it should sound like the church. Chester Bennington, one of them mentioned he was the lead singer for Linkin Park. He was 41 when he died, took his own life. One of the largest rock bands of the last 20 years. Tyler Helinski, now this hits a little close to home because it's not that far away, but Tyler was the heir apparent quarterback at Washington State University behind Luke Falk. So you remember end of last year when they played the Broncos and Luke Falk went down and got pulled from the game? That guy came in. Took his own life in January with no indications. Friends didn't know, parents didn't know, no one. He left a note, but no one knew. And the last one, this is a really disturbing story out of Southern California. Patrick Turner, 16-year-old kid, baseball player, went to a rival high school, the high school I went to, Corona Del Mar High School. And he left notes for his parents and for his brothers and sisters saying, you guys were great, I loved you, you were great parents, great brothers and sisters, but the pressure of the school and performance drove me to kill myself. This is a problem. So back to Avicii, this was a statement released by his family. When he stopped touring, he wanted to find a balance in life to be happy and be able to do what he loved most, music. He really struggled with thoughts about meaning, life, and happiness. He could not go on any longer. He wanted to find peace, continues the statement. Tim was not made for the business machine he found himself in. He was a sensitive guy who loved his fans but shunned the spotlight. Tim, you will forever be loved and sadly missed. The person you were and your music will keep your memory alive. We love you, your family. No one should ever have to write a statement like that. If you get a chance and you have Spotify or whatever, go pull up Avicii's album Stories and listen to the songs and the messages that are in the songs. He is outlining his search for life, meaning, and happiness. The first song on the album is called Waiting for Love. Very, very interesting. Also, we have a Netflix show called 13 Reasons Why about Hannah Baker. It's a fictional story, but it is a very popular show about this girl who leaves these tapes behind, the 13 reasons why she took her own life. And then we have this, Yale. The most popular course at Yale right now, taken by all the students, is a course called The Science of Well-Being. The students there, they come out in droves to take it. It's so popular that Yale released it for free online. I'm enrolled. I'm going to Yale. Aren't you impressed? It's available for you. You can understand what it is that they know. But this is telling us something about our culture. It's really, really important that we understand what's going on. And this was a very recent one. Cigna Healthcare just came out with a loneliness survey that they took. They surveyed 20,000 people online. And the loneliest generation is Gen Z. You can see that there on the left. UCLA created a loneliness scale. Okay, I went to UCLA. Now, I know that's hard to believe, that I went to UCLA. I went because they brought me to play golf. It's not because I was smart. But I interacted with people who were really smart. And I tell you what, when UCLA is building something like a loneliness scale, you know something's wrong. And here's the reason why Cigna Healthcare did this. Approximately 1 in 6 adults in the U.S. suffer from a mental health condition. And research has noted that mental health issues are one of the most rapidly increasing causes of long-term sick leave. So as we transition, when I found the CDC report, I found this article by Ben Shapiro. Some of you maybe listen to him from time to time. And he says, there seems to be a crisis of meaning taking place in America. You think? And that crisis of meaning is heavily linked to a decline in religious observance. Okay, so on this issue, a very sensitive topic, and I'm sure if we, like I said earlier, talked about some stories, that we would have some things to share related to anxiety, depression, and suicide. In a group this big here tonight, there are people in this room dealing with it. It's too much of an epidemic. And what I would tell you is this: if you're struggling with it, don't leave here tonight without talking to somebody. Come talk to me, talk to Jason, talk to someone. Because this is too critical. There's too much at stake for us to not have this conversation and raise this dialogue, especially in the church. Why are we trusting others like Seligman, Brene Brown, Jordan Peterson, and Mihai to be the ones dealing with these issues and speaking into them? I think it's part of what we need to become as a church, is a place where we can begin to have these kinds of conversations. So, obviously, there's an epidemic taking place, and the culture is very confused about happiness. But you know what? The church is confused about happiness too. And it really comes in the form of this conversation in my years. Maybe you've heard this before or listened to a sermon where a pastor has said, hey, God doesn't really want you to be happy. Or read this. He wants you to have what? Joy. As if joy and happiness are somehow different. Or he wants you to be holy. He doesn't want you to be happy. He wants you to be holy. I think if I become more holy, I'm probably going to be happier. Well, so this is an interesting thing. And there has been a wall erected between the word happiness and joy in the church. And this can be completely documented. It's super interesting. But here's the thing. Aren't joy and happiness the same thing? In actuality, they're synonyms of each other. So they really kind of mean the same thing. This is your dictionary definitions from dictionary.com. Happiness is the state of being happy. Joy, a feeling of great pleasure and happiness. Joy is a feeling of great pleasure and happiness. Happiness, a state. We'll keep going. Where's that button? Right there. There we go. Happiness. So is it possible that happiness is a cultivated state of being that has joy as a byproduct? That happiness is a state and an emotion? Is this possible that it's a both and? That happiness is not a fleeting, feeling-based, comes and goes type of thing that we need to shun and really seek joy, which is a more substantial type of life, led that God really wants us to have. And even when you're suffering, you can still have joy. You've heard these things, right? And so this is an interesting thing that we can be confused on this issue. If you want to study this more, I would recommend these 2 books. One, Randy Alcorn wrote a book called Happiness. Most people know it never came out. Most people don't know that it came out, I should say. He also wrote a book on heaven, which, if any of you read that, was like thick, like a reference book on heaven. Fantastic. This, same thing, but on happiness. And you can pick and choose your different topics and go through there all you want. There's another book, Lost Virtue of Happiness by J.P. Moreland. He's at Talbot Seminary at Biola in Los Angeles, La Mirada. And these are really, really good treatments of this issue. And in chapter 5, Randy goes into the separation, how this wall became erected between happiness and joy in the church. And he starts going and documenting and showing, this hasn't always been the case. And he starts going through it and showing the different writers and people who began to create this division. And you know who one of them was? Probably one you guys have read a lot, if you ever read My Utmost for His Highest. Oswald Chambers was a proponent of saying, God doesn't want you to be happy, he wants you to have joy, and describing something totally different. So if you are interested in this, I would encourage you, go check these out and read them and just process them. Because here's what Randy says. He says, to declare joy sacred and happiness secular closes the door to dialogue with unbelievers. If someone is told that joy is the opposite of happiness, any thoughtful person would say, in that case, I don't want joy. We need to reverse the trend. Let's redeem the word happiness in light of both Scripture and church history. Because here's the thing. The church hasn't always been confused about happiness. This is a very recent trend. And rightfully so. I think when we look at culture and the way happiness is defined, it is something we would want to push back against. But when we go back into history and in the ancient world, here's what we'll find. Augustine, the most venerable, clearly understood, enlightened, and reliable constant in the world is not only that we want to be happy, but that we want only to be so. Our very nature requires it of us. St. Thomas Aquinas, it is impossible for any created good to constitute man's happiness, for happiness is that perfect good which entirely satisfies one's desire. Otherwise, it would not be the ultimate end if something remained to be desired. John Calvin, the secret of happiness is that it is necessary for us to go outside of ourselves to find happiness. I'll keep going. Jonathan Edwards, God is the highest good of the reasonable creature. The enjoyment of him is our proper and is the only happiness with which our souls can be satisfied. And then Blaise Pascal. All men seek happiness, this is without exception. Whatever different means they employ, they all tend to this end. The cause of some going to war and of others avoiding it, it is the same desire in both, attended with different views. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the motive of every action of every man, even those who hang themselves. These are legit guys. Agree? And so here's the thing, simple point. They dealt with the issue. They dealt with desire. They dealt with our longing to be happy and to be satisfied. Right? Somewhere along the way, and they actually used the words and talked about it. Obviously, some of this is translated. But they're focusing on this critical issue for us. And so this statement right here, this last one of Blaise Pascal, really hits home for me. Because I told you I would come back in a really personal and sensitive way to talk about the epidemic that I just shared with you guys. So I struggled with anxiety and depression for 7 years, from age 23 to 30. When I got married at 27 to my lovely wife, Carrie, and we have this great family, I was at pretty much the bottom. And I was a Starbucks barista at the time. Don't hold it against me. And I would go to work, and there was periods of time where I had these racing thoughts, and it was a real struggle. And times where I was looking at people, and I wanted to hurt somebody else or myself. Like times where I'd be looking at somebody like, I just want to punch you in the face. And like literally scared inside. I went to work one day at Starbucks, and I could not, I was just like weeping. I could not actually serve customers. I had to stand in the back and wash dishes. And it peaked when I was driving down Highway 101 one day. And I looked at the median, and I'm like, if I just pitch it in the wall, no one will ever know. Now, you probably wouldn't look at a guy like me and go, hey, I'm guessing you are talking about it, but you probably never dealt with it. Well, the reality is it's very close to home for me in more ways than just that. And so I'm grateful today that I could stand here and say that I've experienced transformation, but here's the thing, that doesn't happen for everybody. For some people, it's a chemical issue that will never be fixed. And it's a very, very difficult thing to navigate. And so, like I said before, it's important that we have these discussions. So as we move on, kind of land the plane here, Jesus was not confused about happiness. And I hope this is of great encouragement to you. But first, for us to really understand how Jesus viewed happiness, we have to understand the world he came into. Okay, so at the time that Jesus arrived on the earth, right, comes at a period in history where, if you understand how Scripture is put together, the Old Testament kind of comes to a conclusion, and then there's this 400 to 500 year period, depending on which scholar you're talking to on any given day. And they will say to you, like, well, God went silent. Like, he was no longer, the prophets were not revealing anything to the nation of Israel, and he went silent 400 to 500 years prior to Jesus. Who lived in that time period? These guys. Know who any of those guys are? They're all statues now. But from left to right, you have Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Epicurus. Epicurus would be considered the happiness philosopher. Right? These are your ancient philosophers who really shaped thought in the Greco-Roman world. They were discussing meaning and life and forms and settings, and they had students and all these different things that were going on. They were your culture shapers, your thought leaders in leading up to the first century in the Hellenistic world, the Greco-Roman world, the world Jesus came into. And the primary question that these guys were trying to answer was this. What is a good life? If you had to summarize their conversations and what they were after, it was this. What is a good life? And the good life to Plato would have sounded something like this. It's not good just to be a person who is full of pleasure and not be a person who has wisdom, character, and virtue. Like, they understood that life had multiple components to it and that you had to be a person of substance, wisdom, character, and virtue, but also there was pleasure involved, but they didn't seek pleasure directly. It was about sixth down on the list. But this was the conversation that shaped the world that Jesus came into. So I look at it and I go, that's interesting. Maybe God didn't really go silent. Maybe he said, I'm just going to let you dudes talk for a while. I'm going to let you set the tone. And then Jesus is going to come into the world and live the perfect, most substantive life for us. Perfect life, sinless. And then he goes to the cross, right, on our behalf. So Jesus' views on happiness, right? Remember this slide? Happiness is a cultivated state of being that has joy as a byproduct. Happiness is a state and an emotion. C.S. Lewis gets accused of this quote. I haven't yet been able to verify it. But he says, you can't get second things by putting second things first. You only get second things by putting first things first. And what this is saying is that joy comes as a byproduct. It comes by seeking something else first. A cultivated lifestyle, which we can call happiness. And I would call it happiness. And now I'm not dividing the two. They are related and interconnected. But I think this substantive and satisfying life is the thing that Jesus teaches us to seek. And it has joy as a byproduct. So how do we develop happiness according to Jesus? I'm a little quick on the trigger occasionally. All right, so if you can see this, hopefully it's large enough. This is John chapter 15, verses 7 through 14, right? So remember, keep this in your mind. The philosophers have set the tone. There's a lifestyle that gets shaped, and it has very specific byproducts. There's an outworking. Watch this. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Let's stop there real quick on verse 8. Look at this. By this my Father is glorified. What did we say the goal of life was for the Christian? Glorify God, right? That makes verse 8 really important. Whatever Jesus says next is critical. Because he's saying, this glorifies my Father. Right? The Westminster Catechism says what? The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, right? So here you go. Jesus is saying it. Now, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. So whatever bearing fruit is to Jesus and his perspective is what glorifies God, and it proves that we're his disciples, a prime indicator that we follow Jesus. Did you know that Jesus did this kind of thing in his teaching? You want to know what it looks like to follow him, like that you know that you're actually doing it? Jesus gives us indicators. And so as he goes on, he says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I kept the Father's commandments and abide in his love. Are Jesus' commandments and the Father's commandments different? He's saying, abide in my love and keep my commands, just as I've abided in the Father's love and kept his commands. Well, here's the thing. Jesus did something related to the commandments that we could not do. He fulfilled the law perfectly, right? Jesus could keep the 10 commandments. We can't. But Jesus did give us some commands. Verse 11, he says, these things that I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and your joy may be made full. Right, so you have this whole architecture and beautiful portrait of abiding in love, this lifestyle in love through keeping the commands. And the result is what? Joy as a byproduct. Our joy being full, our life being buoyed by this amazing inner state that we have the incredible opportunity to have be a part of our lives. And then Jesus goes on to say in verse 12, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than they lay down his life for their friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. Look what he goes on and he does. Here's my command, that you love one another as I have loved you. And then he gives us a definition of love, which is agape. Greater love has no one than this, than someone lay down their life for their friends. A continual, sacrificial, self-giving type of love, which is what we get to embody as followers of Jesus. And so you can see Jesus was teaching in many ways to his culture. He was speaking about a lifestyle that gets cultivated, that has joy as a byproduct, that's related and architected by love. The prime distinctive in many ways that we follow Jesus is the quality of our love for one another. And so when you see something like that, you immediately want to go, okay, so if joy is related to this, and there's a few different words there, there's love and commands, you start to connect these words together. Well, where does love and command show up next to one another a lot? It actually shows up in the form of the Great Commandment. You guys are familiar with this passage, I'm sure. One of the teachers, and so this actual experience that you see, or this account of Jesus interacting with a religious lawyer and teacher, the Great Commandment, shows up in 3 different Gospels. And so this right here is the Gospel of Mark. And so one of the teachers of the religious law was standing there listening to the debate. He realized that Jesus answered well, so he asked, of the commandments, which is most important? Okay, so this religious lawyer was a religious regulator, like going around regulating people's religious practice. Comes to Jesus and says, what's most important? Jesus replies, the most important commandment is this: listen, O Israel, the Lord our God is the one and only Lord. And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. Now, Jesus is actually referencing and quoting the Old Testament because the language of the Great Commandment begins actually back. It actually shows up first in Deuteronomy chapter 6, 1 through 11, in a passage called the Shema. If you're interested, go take a look at that passage because that's where this language originates. And then he says at the end, the second is equally important: love your neighbor as yourself. No commandment is greater than these. So this is one account in Mark. And then you have the 3 other ones. And I'm not going to go into them in detail other than to tell you this. When Jesus interacts with the lawyer in the book of Matthew, it's super interesting because the lawyer asks him, he says the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, might. Love your neighbors yourself. He says all the law and the prophets depend on these things. That's what you see in Matthew. In Mark, after what I just read to you, the religious lawyer responds, he says, sounds like my burnt offerings and sacrifices are not going to get that done. And Jesus says, you're close to the kingdom of heaven. And then in Luke, which is actually my favorite, if you're allowed to have favorite parts of Scripture, is that okay? Like this particular account, Luke's my favorite. Because Jesus kind of looks like Socrates, actually. The lawyer asks him the question, and Jesus flips the question back to the lawyer. He says, well, how does it read to you? And the lawyer gives him the articulation of the great commandment, and then Jesus says, do this and you'll live. So good inductive Bible study will take and correlate passages that are familiar, and this is what ultimately in my study I realized: a life lived holistically shaped by the great commandment fulfills the law, not because we can do that in our own strength and power. Romans 5:5 says the love of God was poured into your hearts through the Holy Spirit. Did you know that when the Spirit came to indwell you, that the love of God came to live in you? What are the practical implications of that, right? So we have the ability to now go out and live out this commandment. The Mark passage, it's not religion. This is not burnt offerings and sacrifices. And it's the very thing that brings us life. And so, from Jesus' perspective, moving on, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By all this, people will know you are my disciples if you love one another. Are we starting to see this? What is the indicator that we follow Jesus? It's love, right? We know this kind of ambiguously sometimes in our minds, but do we study love? Do we go sit down and have conversations? Well, how does this actually integrate? Like, if I was going to love God with my mind, what would that look like? What kind of things would that include? What is my mind, by the way, biblically? How about my heart? How are they interconnected? Are these the kinds of conversations we have when it comes to our development as followers of Jesus, going out into a world that's hungering for this very thing? And so what kind of life is Jesus offering us, right? Because I just took you on a whole ride, like a whole fire hose of things, right? Looking at culture's confused about happiness. The church can be confused. The church hasn't always been confused. Jesus was not. What kind of life are we being offered from Jesus? The thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. My purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. This is a New Living Translation. This is what Jesus wants for us in his own words. And this is just a couple samplings of how Jesus talked about happiness. There were many words that he actually used: blessed, rejoice, delight, gladness. But this, in reality, right here, is a statement right from his own words that this is critical to God and was to Jesus. And so, why have I focused on all this? Why have I focused on this tonight when it comes to communicating with culture and talking about this issue? This is a quote from The Lost Virtue of Happiness by J.P. Moreland. The gospel is an invitation to a new life in the kingdom, lived from the power of the indwelling Spirit and resurrection power of Jesus himself. Properly understood, it is an invitation to a life of happiness obtained in a very specific way. This kind of lifestyle can be cultivated in Jesus, in our relationships with him. And folks, what I would tell you tonight, what I would suggest, in a culture and in a world where the suicide epidemic is rising, and our prime distinctives as followers of Jesus is love and joy, I think we need to raise the bar on these conversations that we're having about these topics as to how we begin to engage them, not only personally for ourselves, but also how do we take them to others in culture? Are we prepared to have a discussion with people about their personal happiness? And what would that look like? Because real quickly, as I've done this, and I can share some examples with you at the end here if we have time for that, of recent conversations I've had with people. They want it. You ask them about their lives. You know what they do? They tell you about their lives. It's crazy. Quick story. I'm downtown at Flatbread in Boise with a friend of mine named John. We're sitting at the table having lunch. This girl, server, I'm going to call her Annie, comes up to the table and she takes our order. After she takes our order, she goes, "Can I get you anything else?" And my friend John, because he's a witty, interesting guy, he goes, "Yeah, world peace by the time you get back." And I'm like, so she leaves. She comes back toward the end of the meal and I said, "You know what? You look like an interesting person." I go, "That question he asked you earlier," I go, "I actually want to know what you think about that." I go, "How old are you, like 23, 24? She goes, "No, I'm 21. I go, "I definitely want to know. So where would you start if you had to solve world peace?" This is a conversation at Flatbread in downtown Boise, right? She goes, "Connection. People need more connection. We're so disconnected today." And I'm like, "You should be our president." I'm like, oh my goodness. And she goes, "My sisters are all on, digital, they're looking at rectangles all the time, and she's going all this stuff. Look, we just need to be more connected." She leaves, she comes back again, because if you're talking to servers, just a tip, they're working on other tables, so you got to let them go and come and go if you're going to talk to servers. So she comes back again, and we had a brief conversation about dating. John and I did, and like what it's like for the current culture today to do that. And so we just asked her, I'm like, do like people approach you and like ask for your number anymore? Like I'm pretty old now, I'll be 42 very soon. Like I used to have to go up to a girl and say, hey, you want to go out sometime? Can I get your number? Well, she goes, no, it's all initiated online now. Like someone might come up and try and ask for your name, and then they'll go back and Insta stalk you or Facebook stalk you to find out if you're not crazy or not, and then they'll initiate the date online. Is this true? Some? I'm just verifying, right? I don't want to be saying stuff that's not true. So I'm like, oh my goodness. And then Tinder, all the different apps and stuff, and it's just a whole different world that people are dealing with today. So here's what she said to us at the end of this conversation, and I'll never forget this. She says, guys, thank you. You made me feel like a real person today. And I'm like, if that's not an indictment on our culture, because John and I mean, when we get together, it's pretty goofy, but like, she said this, and I'm like, wow. And she goes, I normally come in here to work, and I put my server mindset on. I go do my job. People don't care about me, but you know what? You stopped to ask about me. You took interest in me. And I'm like, wow. I'm so glad she shared that. And so this is critically important for us to become aware, trained at a level to be able to have these conversations, because here's the reality. A discussion with people about happiness is really easy. And this is something, I don't know if Jason wants me to end up facilitating some of these things with you all to help you feel more prepared to do this. When someone tells you that they want to be happy, the next question you ask them is, well, how do you define happiness? And watch them, they'll go, it's different for everybody, right? And then my next question is always, well, is it different for everybody? And the reality of that is there's only one of two options. Happiness is either self-defined or it's not self-defined. Right? And if a person takes the self-defined route of happiness, then in reality they got huge issues with authority anyway, and the Holy Spirit needs to go mess with them and spin them around until they can realize that they're not the authority of their life. Or happiness is not self-defined, and there is an authority who knows what's best for us, and we are to submit our lives to that authority in Jesus who knows what's best, right? This is a very actual simple conversation to have and where it can lead. And so I'm going to conclude there. I think we tend to try to leave time for, what time is it? 8. So Q&A, Jason, I don't know what we want to do, but if you guys have some questions or some thoughts, my hope tonight with this was really to help you see a reality of what's going on in our world and in our culture. And so hopefully this kind of sparked some interest in you, stirred you up a little bit. Maybe it pushed on some of the things that you believe. But here's the thing, today it's too critical. There's too much at stake for us not to be engaged in the dialogues of our culture. I'm one guy with 10 years of data and a bunch of crazy conversations. But here's what I tell you, this continues to show up. Question? Yes, right. So there has been trends of rising suicide trends amongst young males, but I think if you read the CDC report, don't quote me on this, the greatest level of suicides happening among young females. But you can find this report online. Like if you're interested in some of this, just go type it into Google. I think it's 15 to 24. Somewhere in that neighborhood.
Where would freedom fit into happiness?
Well, I'll address that quickly. I'll say it like this. Love cannot be forced, can it? Right? Like I can't make my wife love me, and she can't force me to love her. Same thing with my kids. So the reality is, how do you train people to do something that can't be forced? Like love. So really, the only thing that's truly free in many ways is love. I find it interesting that when you look at the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit are, you guys know some kind of song about these things? I'm sure there's one, right? Child song about the fruit of the Spirit. But the fruit of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. The most interesting statement is the one that's next. Against these things there is no law, because all of those things cannot be regulated. Right? You can't force someone to be kind. You can't force someone to be patient. Anybody know that? Right? So freedom, I think, ties in because, yeah.
Love itself has to be unconditional love.
Right. Unconditional love. Anyone else? So are any of the folks that are leading the cultural conversations showing us anything? And I would say, yes, they are. I didn't actually say this, I meant to. But here's what I think, and granted, they're a sampling of the voices that are out there. There's probably a whole lot more people that can be on that list of Seligman and Brene Brown and Jordan Peterson. But what I would say is this. I think when they start saying things that really resonate with what we believe as followers of Jesus, what they're doing is they're cutting paths back through the woods. Like Jordan Peterson's cutting path back through the woods, dense forest, toward morality and ethics. And it resonates with us as followers of Jesus because we're like, yes, that's what we need in our culture, more virtue, right? We need virtuous people. I think what it tells us, though, what we should be aware of is this. We as followers of Jesus need to be cutting paths toward those paths to intersect with those people who are on that journey. But if you don't know they exist and what they're talking about, how will you ever talk with somebody who says, hey, you ever listen to Jordan Peterson? Do you even know who he is? No. 12 Rules of Life, or 12 Rules for Life, his book recently, #1 on Amazon. So awareness can be hard because information moves at such a fast pace. Like, we can't have command over all of this. But we could certainly try to at least be aware, right? Did that answer your question? Yeah. Well, I won't go to my opinion on this. I think Jesus certainly teaches only other-centric happiness, resulting out of how we love one another. Like, that's the only way it's possible. And yet we're seeing glimpses, right? When Google comes out and says, hey, our best employees are the ones with the best relational skills. You sit there and you go, okay, so like they're good with other people. So in some ways they're relational and like they're not so focused on themselves. And these are the kinds of people they're wanting to hire. So there are these indicators, right, that are showing up. But I agree, I think, with what you're trying to say is other-centric versus self-centric love and happiness. I don't know that true biblical love and happiness exists in a self-centric form, right? And I think that's why it's so important for us to understand this, because if someone begins to ask you, okay, so what did Jesus really teach? You can answer all their questions for what they long for by showing it and just allowing him to address it from the scriptures. There was another one. Yeah. Kelly.
Yes, to your, you kind of hinted at this a moment ago. Often with the rate and the volume of information out there in our culture, are there tips, either in the form of specific resources or people or things that you think are a good thing for folks who maybe have limited time and limited energy to find out what is going on in popular culture? What are the buzzwords and the trends? Tips for where folks can go to kind of keep up with that.
Tips about what's going on in popular culture?
And who to look to
Go talk to them. Don't talk to me. I'm like, I like to pretend like I know. But you want to really be in tune with what's going on? I think the older generation needs to get with the younger generation, go, tell us what you know. Like, help us out here. Like, inform us about what's going on. Because one of the other things I continually run into with the younger generations when I speak with them is they actually desire mentoring. Like they want connectedness, they want people to invest in their lives, but they mostly feel like the older generation looks at them and goes, they're always on their phones and they're so disconnected and rude and texting all the time and whatever, and like they just don't even care. And it's actually not true. A conversation about, I do a talk on hidden millennials versus visible millennials, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the reality is, I think the next generation is, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but looking for investment, substantial investment in their lives, because that's what we want. We want relationship. So pop culture, I don't know, I'm weird, msnnews.com, it's pretty interesting to scroll through that every morning and see what's going on. I tend to find that. But if you want a great biblical cultural diagnostic, The Lost Virtue of Happiness, that book does a really good job. In the first 27 pages, JP handles this topic really, really well. Anybody else? No? Yeah. Right. How do we turn a conversation about happiness into a witnessing opportunity? And that is a really, really good question, because our tendency and our want is to go, well, I got to fit Jesus in here somewhere, right? But the reality is you have to know what you're dealing with. And I tried to illustrate that earlier when I was talking about there's really only two ways to define happiness. It's either self-defined or not self-defined. For me personally, if I'm talking to somebody who's a self-definer of happiness, I got nothing for them. Because they're going, hey, I'm my own authority. I got it figured out. I'm defining happiness however I want. The people that I'm really interested in trying to talk to are ones who are going, you know what, I'm actually interested. It's not going very well for me. If I had time, I would tell a story about a bartender I talked to in Tempe, Arizona one time. And she was like really interested in, I haven't been a good authority for my own happiness in life. So that's what I'm always looking for, is so if someone's saying yeah, I'm interested in looking at some other things that could help me, like a blueprint. And then oftentimes they'll ask, well, where does it come from for you? And I go, this happened to me actually on a golf course with a caddy once. He was like, so where does it come from for you? I said, well, if I would have told you at the beginning of this where it comes from, you would have laughed at me. I said, the Bible and Jesus. And we had this whole conversation for the next whole and a half. I said, you should check it out. You should actually read the words of Jesus and see if it doesn't address all the questions that you have. So I'm always looking for that delineation. If someone thinks they've got it figured out and they're running on their own license and doing their own thing, defining it however they want, until they hit a brick wall, which often comes through anxiety and depression, ironically, because you can only go so far before you hit a brick wall. When they get to that place, there's a tremendous opportunity there, I think. And granted, I'm just suggesting this. You can do whatever you want. But I don't want to be a bullhorn in people's lives and have them have their backs turned to me, right? You got to ask them about their lives, and then you got to not be weird. That would be like one of the other, just don't be a weird Christian. Honestly, be normal, authentic, genuine, love people, and don't be weird. Anyway, anyone else? Why don't we wrap it up? So quickly as I close, unless there's one more question. No? All right, so just in closing, a little bit quickly about the Love and Transformation Institute and ways that you can stay connected and engaged with us. Love and Transformation Institute, our Who We Are statement is we are innovators who exist to be a catalyst for the transformational nature of love and culture. We are very focused on the relationship between love and transformation. It's in our name. And this is proven. The neurobiology of love changes your brain. What you believe about God wires your brain a very specific way. There's a great book about this called The God-Shaped Brain by Tim Jennings, who's a Christian psychiatrist in Tennessee. As he was doing all of his work and his PhD in psychiatry, he would go home and study the scriptures for 2 hours. He's like, because if this is true and real, it's got to be there. And so we are really focused that a practical, functional, and substantial way that love actually transforms people, this relational, agape, other-centric type of love that we've been talking about. And so a few things that are coming up. One, marriage reset. This is a half-day experience that my wife and I have developed, do it like 3 hours, to help people learn how to hit the reset button in their marriage. You know, if you're into relationships and you're into marriage, this could be really helpful. Our goal is to end up doing 10 to 12 of these around the United States in the next year, but our pilot's going to be in June here in the Boise area. And so if you're interested in staying in contact with us about that, this is upcoming. Basically, we teach 3 things: how to understand and navigate your differences, create an environment where you can have a hard conversation, trusted, safe, and protected environment, and the last one is how to love each other well at every stage. Because marriage is always changing, right? And how do we love each other well when we just need to hit the reset button? And so we approach it from a real practical standpoint because we're not clinical. We're not therapists or anything like that, but we know a lot of them. I've been to a lot of counseling in my life. You should laugh at that. Maybe not. So the other one is we're finishing up our flagship resource, which will be a book, a philosophical and cultural view of love. It'll be a flagship resource put out by the Institute, hopefully this fall, when we wrap that up. And then the last one is the Love to Life Forum. The Love to Life Forum will be an environment, I mentioned anxiety, depression, and suicide. This is a place where we want to create an environment where people who are struggling with that can come and share with others and talk about the issue. And just have a place, whether it's family members who are dealing with it, individuals, whatever. We just feel like it's important to create a space where people can have this conversation. And so these are some forthcoming things. If you're interested in staying in contact with us, here's what I want you to do. Get out your phone right now. And I'm going to have you do this digitally. If you want to stay in touch with us, receive updates from us, go to your messages, open your text, and text LT Institute to 39492. And if you text that there, it's going to send you back a link. You'll fill out a form on our website, and then we will be able to communicate with you about all the things that are coming related to love and transformation. And so, thank you very much for having me tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity, regardless of all the technical difficulties and the stuff I threw at you. But I really, really appreciate the time that you guys gave me. Jason, thank you. And thank you to Faith Community Bible Church.